So let me introduce my people to you one more time. Right next to me, Elaine Okaye, who describes herself as a governance enthusiast and media professional. Right next to her is Dan Chizi Aseda. If you don't know him, you've been living under a rock. He's an artist, he's an architect, and a man who has some very strong views on what's happening in this country. So is the woman that's sitting right next to him. That's Marilyn Kamuru, who's a lawyer, an entrepreneur, and an advocate for women's equality. And on the furthest end of this panel, Isaac Amuke, who is a writer, and might I mention, a finalist for the 2016 CNN MultiChoice Africa Journalist of the Year Award. I am in good hands tonight, or good brains. So we're going to talk about the country, but let me start, I think, with you randomly, Marilyn. What is it that worries you about this country? Does anything worry you about this country? Perhaps I should begin there. Over this last year, over the last couple of years, but really what we've just been through, how do you feel about where we are?
I think the thing that concerns me the most is the tone in leadership and the language that we're using to interact with each other. There's an enormous amount of violence in the rhetoric, a brinksmanship, an inability to engage on ideas and to differ with facts, so that really all we end up doing is sort of pushing each other to the end. And I think it's driving a very extremist narrative so that you are on one side or the other. And if you see anything positive about one side, then you couldn't possibly see anything positive about the other. And I think that that's very difficult for a lot of Kenyans who are finding, I see your point here, I see their point there, but I kind of think both of you need to move to the middle a little bit. So I think it's the extremism in the language, but an enormously violent rhetoric, intolerance. And I find that extremely concerning, especially moving forward. Yeah.
Do we have ideas, Dan? Different ideas that we can latch onto and say, ethics and principles and values on either side that are being espoused in this country, do you think?
No, I think obviously there are people with ideas and there are people that are consciously working to make these ideas a reality. I think our problem is what Marilyn was discussing. It's degenerated into an us versus them. And so then when the conversation is us versus them, we're not really talking about different ideas that we can work on. The goal is to win. So then we're just going to do anything to win. We're not really trying to improve the situation that we are in.
So it's all about winning?
Yeah, right now I think people just want to win. So whatever that
is. Anyone winning?
Unfortunately, in any conversation...
Or who's winning?
Well, in any conversation, especially with politics or any relationship of any kind, if you're in there to win, then everybody's going to lose, unfortunately.
Okay. Isaac, when we were speaking with you, you said we live in a post-truth era where, it doesn't matter. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that we have no starting point in any conversation. Everything is a debate. For example, if you put a bottle of water here, someone here might say it's not a bottle of water. Then we'll start debating about that. Okay. So in that sense...
we don't have an established set of facts?
We don't have a starting point in any conversation, political or otherwise. And our elections can tell you that, how we've handled them. Is the process free and fair? What is free and fair? So everything will degenerate into a debate. So we don't have a point of convergence, right?
So we cannot even begin to have a conversation. What is free and fair? We have to get down and determine that.
Exactly.
And even that is
when
debated.
It's supposed to be obvious, right? Like there's some things which are supposed to be obvious, but nothing is obvious anymore in this country. Everything is debatable.
What keeps you awake at night, Elaine?
I think the biggest cause of concern for me is the extremely divisive nature of the politics and just the direction that we're headed. And the shocking or almost disappointing thing, it's a lot of the young, educated people who are engaging in a lot of this hateful, very divisive talk, We've gotten to a point where all somebody needs to do is look at your last name and make assumptions about where your allegiances lie. And, based on that sort of criteria, based on that sort of situation, we fail to even hold our leaders accountable. But just because I support this person or he belongs to the party that I support, I'm completely unable to hold him accountable, which is very concerning because, I mean, we need to make a discernment between support and holding politicians accountable because they're supposed to work for us at the end of the day.
So you can support someone and hold them to account?
Absolutely. Yes. Rigorously accountable, in fact.
But that's not sort of the sense we get. You're even deemed as a traitor then.
I think actually that's maybe, that's where we should start. How do you make the voice that you have count, whoever you support? So if you support, if you live in an area that's predominantly X-party, can you get your ideas and your well-being to be the top of the priority for them over there? If you're struggling with that, then it's symptomatic of what we are all struggling with. But we have to find ways now to make supporters have a greater influence on the party.
But yet what Elaine says, is something you see on Twitter as well about, young, educated persons who you think would have, the wherewithal or the exposure to say, this is what I agree with. But then on Twitter, sometimes some of the things that you see, Marilyn, is,
It's horrid. But I also think, and this is where we need to be very deliberate about the tone and what we set as the standards for leadership, it's incentivizing certain conduct. So if I want to get noticed by a politician, I am not going to be moderate. I'm not going to be balanced. I'm going to be an extremist. And that's how I get noticed. And that's how I'm going to build a profile. And that's how someone's going to want to talk to me and say, oh, maybe, you should speak more for our party, or we can invite you maybe to inauguration or something else. So we've created a set of incentives that are actually directing people towards extreme behavior, towards intolerance, and that's tacitly endorsed on both sides. And so I think really, in all fairness, what you're seeing with a lot of young people isn't necessarily that they don't know, it's ambition. It's an attempt to be part of the political conversation, but the political conversation is not entertaining you if you want to talk about ideas. So if you want to get in, they're saying, well, let's get in, which is usually the discussion people are told. They're told, get in, and then once you're in, you can change the conversation. I think for some of us, we're like, no.
That's been wrong, getting in and wanting to change the conversation, Isaac?
I'm going to be a little harsh.
Okay.
I think we have a collective problem, which is immaturity. As a country, all of us, we are all immature. And the only way we're going to move forward is if we grow up, all of us, literally. Because all round, it's immaturity. There's no other polite way of putting it. On Twitter, our politicians, our institutions, it's just immaturity. We are like children in a playing ground. It's chaos, it's law of the jungle. So we really have to stop and make it deliberate.
Yeah.
They say maturity is a choice and growth is biology or something like that. Like, of course we are old and so on, but we mature as a country, all of us. So you have to get to a place where we'll decide deliberately that we are going to grow up, all of us.
Okay.
Then now we'll see things changing.
All right.
We'll have deliberate conversations. We'll be deliberate about the things we do. But as things stand now, we are all immature as a country.
Okay.
And that is our tragedy.
All right. So, we did promise that we would speak openly, immaturity, okay, and having deliberate conversations. I like that. So, Elaine, what should we be talking about that we're not talking about right now? What should be the ingredients of our conversations? What should we be saying?
I feel like the main focus should be, not about any particular party or person, but about the country in general, about where we're going, about our democracy. How can we strengthen our democracy? We've been able to do a lot in terms of devolution and that, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. There's still a lot of boxes that need to be ticked. And nobody's talking about this. All this gets drowned out in the noise, in the political noise that goes back and forth. So I feel like we're losing track of where it is we're supposed to go as a nation. How can we build our economy? How can we strengthen our democracy? How can we make just living better for our people?
Some very specific questions, but how many of you get a reaction on Twitter, like 300 retweets, if you started to talk about issues? How popular are you guys on Twitter?
Maybe that should have been
because you're having perhaps meaningful conversations.
It's not the A-list, no.
Not the A-list, no. Isaac?
Let me say this, Yvonne.
Yeah.
I think retweets are not a measure of anything.
Yeah.
In the sense that you can say something brilliant and people can love it,
Yeah.
but will they take it to heart? Do they believe it? Or is it just...
It's the cool thing to
yes,
do. Hit the
right?
retweet button.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, yes, we have brilliant people, of course, who do brilliant things. But do we take them seriously?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Someone like David D. David D is an intellectual of global repute, right? But we don't engage him as a country, right? We've reduced him to...
Oh, we do, but we call him a voodoo economist.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That is not engagement.
Yeah.
You know? So we
Because we
need,
probably don't like what he has to say.
we need to, if you are disagreeing with him, challenge him.
Yeah.
Tell him, why are you taking this political position? Why are you saying Kenya is a bad marriage, right? Let him come and explain himself, right? Let other public intellectuals occupy that space as well. Let us have conversations. Let us disagree, right? On substance. Let us not reduce it to, you know, how many followers, how many I don't know what. It's chaotic, you know. A friend of mine likes to call Twitter mchongwano. It's like nothing serious happens there. It's just mchongwano, right? So retweets and so on and so forth are all, you know, good. But do we take those things to heart?
So
No,
even though we
don't.
amplify the messages by retweeting it and everybody gets to see it,
Well, I think
it's what? Is it cosmetics?
I take what you're saying a little further.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem we've seen with people like David Ndii, and I'd also add Dr. Njoya, Wendy Njoya, is when you can't engage with facts, you then decide that we have to just trash your reputation. It's an inability to accept expertise. To just say, you know what? You actually know more than me about this subject, right? And so you find people, and I think everyone, maybe that's why Twitter is called Mchongwano, because sometimes people come on my TL, and I'm like, this is such a basic legal issue, it's not even worth discussing with you. And it's important, I think, for us to start saying, you know what? Yvonne, you know way more about media than me. What can I learn from you? And that doesn't make you better than me as a person, but we've created this environment, and maybe you're right, it is immaturity, where you're unwilling to accept, you sort of feel like citizenship means that we have equal say, even when you are more ignorant than the other person. You know, citizenship is an equality of participation, but it means that you seed expertise when you find it.
Okay.
You know, so we've gotten to this place where the experts are treated like just anybody.
No, I mean, I think that's a very important point. There's actually no country for science and for math and for critical thinking.
Yeah.
And you can go through any sector. Do we have the best, most qualified person working in it? One of the examples that I've been harping on, I'll tell everyone who can listen, is a lady called Karen Korir, who is born in Kenya but lives in the States. And she was in the top 40, under 40 airport management people in the States.
Yeah.
I mean, a person who obviously has very rare skill.
Yeah.
I don't believe that management of airports is something you learn quickly, or you can do it, or I would be able to do it. So here's a person who is of Kenyan descent and is connected to us and is achieving these great things out there. But then who do we have running our airport here? We had a vacancy for years, and then eventually when we go and put people, it's like we don't even try to find the most qualified. We didn't try. Because if we are looking for a Kenyan who can do a job, we have one who's probably very, very highly qualified and is doing the work now. Why isn't she here? Because that's the person who would want to run our airport.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. Elaine, let's talk a little bit about, the politicians that we have. So it doesn't seem like it's too abstract. So we've got Raila and Uhuru, two people on opposite sides of the political divide. One will be sworn in on Tuesday. Another is saying they'll have a parallel event. They can't celebrate while others are mourning. But what are your thoughts about, where these two gentlemen have brought us to?
A key concern for me is the fact that the nature of our politics and the nature of our democracy is a bit young, I would say, in the sense that we've centralized so much focus and attention on people, on figures, and not on the institutions, for instance, as the political parties. We have almost this cult-like obsession with Uhuru and Raila. rather than, having like a democracy that is based on strengthened political parties that are actually based on certain values, certain principles, and certain ideologies. So we don't have that. We have this...
Do you see a difference in ideology between the two?
I would say I don't see a clear ideology either way. For me, it's just about rallying supporters. Who has the biggest numbers, that's it, and let's go, which is concerning because then we don't have sort of like a long-term strategy. I feel like the more that we progress generally, not even just as Kenyans, but as Africans, we kind of tend to lose the values that our founding fathers had. People like Thomas Sankara, people like Kwame Nkrumah. These people had long-term visions. I'll give an example like Kwame Nkrumah. He died a very simple man with very little to his name, and yet in the 60s, he steered the purchase of a lot of properties in New York, in London, for Ghana. Ghana today has properties in London and New York and a bunch of other cities that nobody can afford today. So you see, he had that long-term vision. I know it's not just about, infrastructure or things like that. It's a bunch of, it's more about even just values and where you want the country to go. I think we're losing that the more we progress, which is unfortunate.
Okay, interesting. Hold that thought. I want to come and ask that same question to the rest of you because I want to hear your views on these two personalities that feature so heavily in our politics right here in the country. What are your thoughts? Continue to send them in as well. The hashtag is Checkpoint, please do. And we'll also talk about whether this is all idealistic and whether we're not being, pragmatic. But all of that is after the break here on Checkpoint. We'll be right back.
This is KTN News.